Bill to trade, major ag policies headline this year's midterm elections. Sarah Mock joins us now from our Washington News Bureau to break down the latest results. Thanks for joining us this morning, Sarah. What's the big picture? What kind of impact is this election going to have on farm policy in Washington?
Well, good morning, John. Yeah, basically the takeaway from last night's election was not a lot of changes for agriculture. We did see the Senate hang on to the House, or to the Senate. Republicans hang on to the Senate, excuse me, and even pick up a couple of seats, but they didn't hit that 60-vote majority that would give Pat Roberts, the chairman of the House Ag Committee and the Farm Bill Conference Committee, the leverage he would need to really kind of take over the process and move things through on the Republican agenda. So still need a bipartisan bill there to get those 60 votes in the Senate. The big change from last night, of course, is Democrats taking back the House, which will mean that Collin Peterson, the current ranking member on the House Ag Committee, is likely to take up that chairmanship again. He was already chairman from 2007 to 2011, so we're likely to see him come back. That's pretty good news for ag, from what I hear from folks here in Washington. He's the most conservative Democrat in the House. He votes with President Trump a lot of the time, and he's in line with ag, a good advocate, a lot of people think, here in Washington. So that's going to be our biggest change and could influence the way that some of these talks move forward.
Sarah, you briefly mentioned about the Senate. Is there anything else over on the Senate side to be watching for?
Absolutely. A couple of big changes, of course. We saw the biggest one probably is Heidi Heitkamp. She is the Democrat from North Dakota. She lost her race last night to Kramer in that state. Those are actually both members of the current Farm Bill Conference Committee. Heitkamp, of course, sits on the much smaller Senate side, so how that moves forward will be interesting to watch. Joe Donnelly in Indiana also lost his race to Mike, or is likely to lose his race to Mike Braun. He sits on the House or on the Senate Ag Committee as well, though not a part of the Farm Bill Conference Committee. Probably not any significant impacts there. And then, of course, John Tester, his race has not been called yet. It's very close up there in Montana. He sits on the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee and will likely to have some impacts. That could have some impacts in how funding moves forward. But so a number of changes likely on the Senate Ag Committee. But as far as leadership goes, Pat Roberts, the chairman of that committee, and Debbie Stabenow both want. Pat Roberts didn't have a race. Debbie Stabenow won. So leadership on the Senate side for ag is going to be very consistent.
Well, you mentioned all of these changes. What does it mean in the big picture going forward then?
So the biggest thing for ag right now is that Pat Roberts is still planning to take up the Farm Bill as soon as next week. Again, of course, with the Democrats moving into power in the House, we may be looking at Republicans in the House being more willing to compromise. We very likely are going to see a bill that passed in the lame duck session that looks a lot more like the Senate bill than the House bill that passed, just because those folks are, trying to get what they can before the leadership moves to Democratic hands next year. So I would expect to see, and I think a lot of folks here in Washington expect to see a farm bill move pretty quickly now that some of these decisions have been made and folks are headed back to Washington next week.
RFD-TV's D.C. News Bureau Chief Sarah Mock. Sarah, thanks a lot for the update. Congressional races were not the only items on the midterm ballots. The outcome of several key measures will impact farm country. California